I'm Erik Anderson, Brandon Maslen. We work on Microsoft Edge, and we're here to talk a little bit about what we're doing with tracking prevention. I think this is technically a discussion, so we'll try to make sure we have time for questions and other things like that. But for the most part, Brandon will cover it, so I'll sit down, and there you go.
Hey, everyone. So like Erik was saying, open discussion. So we have a couple of slides to help us out. But if you have any questions, you want to dig deeper into something, just raise your hand and we'll go from there. So wanted to start by talking about our tracking prevention feature. So we have 3 modes that we offer our users. And one of the first modes we offer them is basic. So this is for users who want a minimal amount of protection. And so we're going to protect them against malicious content such as fingerprinting and crypto mining. And this is for users who don't mind sharing their data with companies, and they even value personalized ads. And that brings us to our balanced, which is our default mode. So this is going to protect against a broad range of trackers. And primarily what this is going to do is block storage access. So it's going to block setting new cookies, sending cookies, as well as access to things like IndexedDB and local storage. And what we want to do is not break the web with this. It should just work, and users shouldn't have to worry or think about it. We also know, though, there are some more privacy-conscious individuals, and so we've given them the strict mode. And what that is we're going to block a lot more content. Sorry. We're going to block a lot more content. And in turn for that, we might break the web a little bit, but they get a little bit more privacy. And so you can kind of see a quick setting or a quick screenshot of the settings where our users can choose between those modes. But the more interesting part, is how do we interact with the Chromium platform? And so what we do is we partner with a third party to have a list of what we consider a tracker. And we bundle that list and shipped it as an embedded component, as well as something that we can update out of band. So that way, as our list of trackers changes, we can ship that to our users without having to worry about shipping a new Canary beta stable version to them. And when we took this list, we actually compile it into a new format. What we want to do is we want to make sure we minimize the size on, we want to make sure we minimize the size on disk. So that way we're not taking up a lot of space on our users' machines, as well as when we ship a new version to our clients, we aren't using a lot of bandwidth. We also wanted to make sure that format was nice and easy to load into memory. So we're not using a lot of memory when we keep that list for every lookup. And the way we do those lookups is we opted for a single service in the browser process. So something very similar to safe browsing or our smart screen service. Rather than federating those requests to every renderer process, we wanted to make sure we took that decision away from a potentially insecure renderer process and made that in a single place. And then we have various preferences on every profile. So that way you could have one profile balanced, one in strict mode. And then for the storage access, what we've done is we've said, hey, we're going to integrate very similar to other cookie settings like block third-party cookies. So we integrate into the browser process as well as the network service. So anywhere that you request, hey, do I have access to storage? We're going to do that check. Hey, is this the tracker? And then potentially restrict that. For the resource loads, we've opted to use URL loaders. So for navigations, we have an URL loader in the browser process. And then for resource loads, we have an URL loader throttle in the renderer process, which then we use Mojo to asynchronously request, hey, is this a tracker? And then potentially abort or cancel that request. And so how does this present to a website? So if we do block a resource load, what we're going to do is we're going to abort that request with an error blocked by client. So that request is just going to abort and then cancel. For storage access, this is very similar to the way block third-party cookies and other settings work. So if we cancel that, we're going to potentially raise a script error or anything else very similar to the way block third-party cookies works. Some of the challenges we saw with this was, there's a lot of plumbing through the various layers. as well as even just laying out the code just to make sure, hey, are the right parts and components, services, and then making sure that as we're getting changes from upstream, we're not conflicting with that or having to refactor a lot of things. Now, blocking a lot of things is great, but we want to make sure the web still works. So what we've done is we've actually introduced several compatibility mitigations. So there are times where that tracking prevention does more harm than good. So take an organization like Microsoft or Google. There's a various number of top-level domains. So a user might be on Microsoft.com or Xbox.com, and there could be content that's loaded in a third-party context as far as the web's concerned, but it's still first-party to that organization. So what we said is, hey, that organization still has the ability to track a user or maintain their personal information on the back end. So the downside of blocking that content is login flows break, applications break. There's really just more harm than good. So we allow that content. And one other thing we've actually recently started evaluating is the notion of a relationship mitigation. So Chromium has the site engagement. So basically, if a user interacts with a given origin, if they load the website, they interact with the form, they scroll, they load media, they build up this score saying how engaged they are with the origin. And we've taken that a step further and said, hey, any of these domains within a given organization, if a user's engaged above a certain threshold, we're going to consider them to have a relationship with that organization. And very similar, if you're browsing in balance mode and you're on a site that embeds content from, say, your favorite social media site, something that you engage with, we're going to allow that content temporarily. And then as your engagement decays, we're going to start restricting that content. And we found this was actually a good balance between blocking content and unblocking the content that users most care about and interact with. And something we're looking at in the future is the storage access API. So this is something we actually have a dedicated discussion on tomorrow. So if you're interested, please stop by and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so yeah, that was kind of the prepared content, very quick. Anything anyone wants to dig more deep into? Yeah.
This might get into legal territory, so happy for you to just punt if so.
Okay.
But I'm just wondering if for one part of privacy and tracking is just like GDPR and cookie prompts.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked at like interventions that could be applied? Like if the user is on a strict policy, just don't offer the cookie prompts.
There are a bunch of other things we are looking at. We haven't looked at anything specifically with cookie prompts yet.
How exactly do you determine if two origins belongs to the same organization?
Yeah, so part of the third-party list that we get has the notion of an entity, and that actually predefines that this set of domains or origins belongs to a given entity or organization.
So you just have a static list of it.
Yeah, and we are constantly making changes to that as we see, hey, there's more domains, potentially mergers, acquisitions.
Okay, yeah. Cool, thanks.
Have you looked at how the tracking protection and cookie blocking really works with first-party trackers as well, or is that something that you have not investigated yet?
We're primarily focused on third-party trackers. Okay. In the first-party context, it's a little bit hard. A lot of times people have accounts and sign in, so it's harder to get a rein on that data.
On the request flow, either outbound or inbound, how much of the checks are synchronous IPC blocking versus async? Are any of the cookie checks blocking, mostly trying to avoid the extension/service worker round trips across processes?
Yeah, and we do sync checks for the storage access, but we do make sure that we do it. That's the one exception, is we will do that in the network service directly to avoid a synchronous IPC call. For the resource blocking, we do an async module call.
Hi, was wondering how you think through as third-party trackers are increasingly under pressure, and first-party trackers are enabled. How you imagine that will work in terms of merchants or publishers or social networks or that kind of thing, increasingly falling back to other mechanisms to track users, whether fingerprinting or PII joins or other kinds of techniques that users may have less visibility and control over?
Yeah, I think the main thing is we don't want to break the web. So things like the relationship mitigation, we're hoping allows a lot of that legitimate or desired traffic. But it is a bit of a whack-a-mole game. You know, you see things like Apple's implementation where they start going after, hey, this part of the web, the tracker started doing that. And we are constantly looking at what's next and, you know, what's the most meaningful impact to protect our users.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add to that, which is, this is one thing we're doing. There's a lot of conversations among browser vendors about, how do we move privacy forward? So Google has, the privacy sandbox things. There's what Apple's doing. Mozilla has something similar to this. So we're trying to kind of also figure out, like, are there ways to, more collaboratively work together to, identify, more native platform things that, might be able to lock things down in a way that's done across all browsers. And then I think some of those other things are potentially regulatory. I can't say with any certainty where that'll end up, but certainly things like joining IPs in the back end are kind of hard to control from a client. But yeah, we're trying to think about it holistically. This is something we think is an appreciable improvement, but it's certainly not the end of the road. You want to add something?
Yeah, I guess just to add on, like we're providing a strict setting. None of the mitigations are applied on strict, and the list we're using is the same list as other open source browsers like Mozilla and Brave, for example. The mitigations are mainly in balance to make sure we give maximum privacy but not break compat, which is the relationship-based stuff. In terms of, like, this is just the start of the journey. This is one feature. Fingerprinting, we don't want user or trackers to move towards fingerprinting. At least today, a user can delete cookies. With fingerprinting, there's no setting to stop fingerprinting. So I think this is just, there's a privacy community group. We want to work with other browser vendors on that. How do we reduce the fingerprinting surface? We also have a proposal on, auditing. Should there be, if there is regulation, is there a way for us to, look at trackers and see, do they give transparency and control on the back end? Do they give users the ability to delete their data, see their data? And if so, should those be treated differently versus the ones that give you no visibility into data?
Hi, just a question on the implementation side. Sorry. When you block a request on a site that has a service worker, do you know if you will still get a fetch event first? Is like it only at the network layer, or would it prevent the service worker from seeing the request at all?
Yeah, so it is in the URL request. So it depends if it's blocked. Like you would, if the first hop wasn't blocked, then you would see the fetch event. Otherwise, it gets blocked first, and then, for example, like if the first request isn't a tracker and then it redirects, you would get that fetch event. Basically, we block first before it goes to the service worker.
Yeah, I mean, even if the service worker is in the same renderer, I guess. I guess it depends where the throttle is. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, the throttle is in the renderer process.
You talked a lot about the trade-offs for maximizing user experience. That makes perfect sense. But think about from a developer experience perspective. Have you talked with many developers? I'm worried about predictability aspects, like, I made a change to my site. I did all my testing in production. It was perfectly fine. And then I deployed to real, like where the origins are different, and something that worked well in production completely fails to work in reality.
Yeah, so our PM team is constantly reaching out to developers and end users. We do have developer-facing console messages, and we do try to make this deterministic. So, if you do have production domains, you should be able to see, hey, yes, these are in our list or aren't in our list, as opposed to some of the more heuristic or dynamic things we could be doing.
Is there some way for a developer to add their staging domains to say, treat this staging domain the same as this production domain?
We don't have any public documentation on it, but as part of the component, you could go on disk and actually modify those lists.
Yeah, I guess I can add on to that, which is, we do want to make developer tooling better over time. I think, it's something that allows the developer to kind of tweak things and see how it affects it. Obviously, there's like the site engagement debug page where you can tweak things, but is that understandable to a third-party developer? Probably not so much. So we don't have anything immediate, but we are thinking about it.
Like I think in September, Microsoft and Mozilla jointly organized like a web privacy summit. All the browser vendors got together for that. One of our goals of that summit was also, it looks like a bunch of different browser vendors are doing different things to tackle the privacy problem. How do we work together so we can give developers a consistent experience? Because not all, even the browsers that build tracking preventions are doing very differing things. So like one of the outcomes of that discussion, I think at TPAC, the privacy community group are working to create that together with all the browser vendors. But like, how do we start standardizing some of these behaviors so it can be more consistent?
Back there.
Thanks. This might be a naive question, but you said you use external lists. Do you give any special treatment to Bing ads and like your own stuff?
No, we don't. So, if there's a Bing or Microsoft property as well as a Google property or anyone else, it's all equal. We do try to make the compatibility mitigations so everyone has fair game, an equal opportunity to be potentially unblocked.
So I'm very supportive of improving the overall privacy protections for users, and I'm happy that Microsoft is engaged in this work. I think one of my big concerns is as all this gets tightened down, that publishers, developers, advertisers, analytics companies, others will keep moving to different mechanisms or platforms where it may get harder and harder for browsers or other kinds of products like that to control things. So I'm wondering to what extent we've thought through, or Microsoft has thought through, what happens if browsers keep getting tighter and tighter, but not everything else does. Would money just flow to where things aren't as tight and where there's less protection? And is that actually a net benefit or a net loss for users? Yeah.
So I think that's a very valid point. Something we're concerned about is we don't want to just have a stick without a carrot. We maybe the first thing to clarify is we believe advertising is a really important part of an open and free web. It keeps websites free. We avoid walled gardens. So we don't think advertising is a bad thing. We do want to make sure users have transparency and control over their data, how their data is used, to be able to stop tracking if they feel that's something they don't want to see. Like we've done some user studies where we've seen some class of users that don't want ads that are creepy or that they feel are creepy because they feel they're following them. But another set of users that feel like if I'm going to see an ad, it better be relevant. So we believe that users should really have choice. So that's why we have multiple settings. So we don't want to just break the web and force advertisers to go to different mechanisms. Like the worst outcome for us is like we'd make some of this tracking prevention features and everyone moves to, for example, fingerprinting, which we feel is worse. So we're hoping that some of this is like a stick. There's tracking preventions, users can stop some of these behaviors, but at the same time, we want to provide future mechanisms or better ways to do some of these things in a privacy sensitive or privacy aware way. So there are some good proposals, including from Google that are being discussed in standards bodies. So we're looking forward to evaluating those. But hopefully we can also bring advertisers in this discussion. This is not just a browser thing. This is a cross-industry problem. We think this is like really a global societal problem that we need to work with browser vendors. We need to work with advertisers, publishers, and try to come up with how do we fix the web in this case.
So you said that you have some users who prefer personalized advertising experience. I was just wondering, with the basic option, which was non-default, if you have any sense of the number of users, like percentage-wise, that would actually select that, or if you have any data from your beta or canary channels you can share. I don't.
Yeah, I think even in balanced, you do still get some personalized ads. It kind of depends on the patterns and what sites you're going to. It's not been a lot of people explicitly choosing basic. We actually think it's typically going to be users who think they have a reason to, in terms of perhaps a compat break. And I think if we saw a spike in basic, our first line of thought would be, there's probably some compat issue, rather than there's a spike in users choosing to get more personalized ads. But we haven't yet shipped a stable channel build. I think it's really hard to reason over a beta channel audience, just because the typical user that's going to go out and look for that's vastly different than the typical consumer. So I think the answer is we don't really know yet what that'll look like. But yeah, I think that's one way of characterizing it. I think there may be some users who may to Jatinder's point perhaps want something more personalized, but primary would be, hey, they can self-resolve something while we get a list update out or otherwise fix a bug.
Just curious, because the naming sort of basic implies something you might not want to select versus flexible. Some benefit. I just didn't know if that was.
Yeah, I would say we went through a lot of rounds of what do we name these, and words are difficult to choose and convey exactly the right thing. But
So it's awesome that you guys are here having this open dialogue. I think this is really important for the web. I think multiple companies need to take multiple perspectives. So thank you very much. But I'm going to continue the trend of asking the tough questions. And feel free to pass or hand it to Tinder if you want. At CDS a couple days ago, Google talked about how we saw publishers lose about half their revenue when there's no personalized advertising. First of all, have you done analysis of how much revenue you think publishers lose, especially in your balanced mode? You mentioned there's some personalized advertising. Are you working with publishing industry at all? Are you asking what news organizations will not be able to make a profit for users on your browser? What that sort of thing.
You mind if I punt to you, Jatinder? Or okay, cool.
As I mentioned before, we think advertising is an important part of the web. We're not trying to disable advertising. I think we want users to feel like they have transparency and control over how their data is used. And so hence why we have these settings where a user can choose to disable. Our intent with the balance is maximum privacy, but don't break compat. There's a lot of web functionality out there that can be used for tracking, like for example, login flows or embedded videos or social network like buttons. But we want to make sure that those experiences work. Compat just works. In terms of working with advertisers, we're hoping, like Microsoft's joined the web business advertising group in the W3C, even the privacy community group. We're hoping to have these open dialogues and discussions. So like we have published one proposal around the auditing. That's one example of reaching out to advertisers. Like, what if the goal is users have transparency and control? Why don't you help give users transparency and control? If the user can see their data, maybe give a secure signal to delete their data. Maybe we can treat this as a certified tracker or someone that gives that an independent auditor can confirm that this is, following these rules. And if so, maybe we would allow those in balance, for example. So I think we're still very early in the journey. We're hoping to have an open conversation. Maybe regulation steps in here, but I don't think we want to do this alone.
Just a quick follow up to that. So if businesses, do you expect that publishers should be able to detect the setting that users are using? Like, is it reasonable, for example, like say I'm a news organization and I decide I just can't afford to basically my models are either going to be personalized advertising or subscriptions. Is it all right from your perspective, if I as a publisher basically put a paywall up for users that have selected balanced and ask them and say, please either switch to basic or buy a subscription? Is that something you would see as like an attack that you'd work to try to avoid?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we don't want to see paywalls, and ideally, we wouldn't want to see sites blocking our browser settings based on these settings. I would actually turn this question around and say, like, it would be great if the browsing industry works together on how do we collectively solve this problem. I really don't view this as an edge problem. I view this as a global societal issues. Like, how do we work together, not just with Edge and other browsers, but also with Chrome? Like, if collectively we had new standards of behaviors that we expect the web to behave, and we took into account, giving users transparency and control of their data and respecting their choices, how would we define a new model that also works for the advertising industry? So I think I view this as a V1, as first step in a longer discussion. I would actually love to continue this discussion with the Chrome team as well. Like, ideally, collectively, we have new changes. So we don't see sites saying, go use this other browser to avoid this feature.
So can you feature detect this?
Potentially, I think it's similar to an ad blocker. We see people detecting ad blockers today. You make a request that would get blocked by this mode. I think that's something we'll have to keep an eye on and kind of iterate and figure out what makes sense. But yeah, certainly someone could detect some class of these things. And did you have a question?
I did, but it was aspect.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. One. When you first mentioned the default medium setting, you said it blocked all cookies. I assume you meant all third-party cookies at that point, just as a point of clarification?
Yeah, so anything that's classified as a tracker, that's third-party.
Okay, so that's safe. I was just assuming that was what you meant. The other question that I have is that there's been 2 or 3 references of we don't want to break the web. How actually do you evaluate whether feature X or Y or Z or one of these elements is in some way breaking the web? Is there like a methodology that you have for that?
Yeah, I think that's a hard problem. We do have vendor teams that we actually do test passes. We do extensive self-hosting as well as listen to user feedback. But it is really hard to discern a signal that says, hey, this content didn't load, or the layout shifted, and that means it's breakage versus just, hey, yeah, we didn't load a script, but the page is still functional.
And we do have an in-app feedback UX where we as it transmits, submit what tracking prevention setting did they have. So if we do see, hey, the site is broken and we think it's not reproing for us, we can at least get some signals of like, oh, it looks like this user actually had tracking prevention strict, for instance, and let's reason over it that way.
If the web is broken to the user. So both those approaches that you mentioned there are evaluating whether the web experience for the end user is broken. Is there anything to determine whether the experience for the publisher or the content producer is modified? Is there any way for them to find out if they're being blocked or not?
Yeah, I think this is part of why we're talking about it publicly, and we're joining the web advertising group in the W3C. Is some of these signals actually need to come from those entities. We haven't yet shipped a stable channel, so I'm sure we'll have some deeper conversations with some of those folks. And I think it's something where totally parse the concerns around publisher economics, and this is going to be an iterative process. But yeah, right now I would say. We've been working with the Bing team to make sure we understand what it looks like for them. And as Brandon mentioned, we don't have special code for Bing, but there's a clear partner where we're able to kind of reason over it a bit. Yeah, we have dev tool console logs. I think some of this was more about how do we measure the impact to non-user constituencies, correct? Yep. And I think he was first. Here you go.
Thanks. So I was just curious if there is breakage that's happening. Like, I'm buying something, I'm in the middle of a shopping cart thing, and it's not working. as a user, is there something that's kind of showing me that something's blocked? And if there is, like, can I disable it on a per resource basis or origin basis, something like that?
Yeah, you can disable it per origin. We've kind of gone back and forth with user studies about, hey, do we just put it in the page info? Do we have something in the address bar? Currently, we do have it in the page info. So you would have to pull that out and be like, hey, yeah, stuff is blocked. I'm going to turn it off for this origin. But we're constantly evaluating if that's the right place for that. That's correct. It is the page origin.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Maybe one more question, if someone had one. If not, thank you for coming, and we'll be here the rest of the week. So
yeah, thanks.
Please let us know.